Please welcome our host, Philip Campbell, Editor-in-Chief of Nature and of the Nature Publishing Group.
On the 9th of November 1989, I was at home watching the events unfold on the television. I can remember it vividly.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's a great privilege to be here, not only because of the nature of the audience and the nature of the occasion, but also because of the nature of the speakers who I'm going to introduce and host. These speakers are all driven by not just curiosity, I would say a deep curiosity, and they're driven by what I would call grand visions. And those grand visions lead to breakthroughs on occasion, but above all they lead to a drive to uncover the way the world works and how we can use the way the world works to better our world. So there is another grand vision that I want to just bring to your attention before we get into their talks. And that is, where does that knowledge exist? It exists in their heads, but it also exists out there as an electronic edifice. That is now what the scientific literature looks like. And as someone who, as an editor, tries to care for bits of that literature, I do just want to spend 2 minutes, I promise, just to say a little bit about that literature, because I think it is a weak literature at the moment, and the question is, how do we, the community of editors and scholars and funders and governments and so on, make it a strong literature? How do we break down the walls around that literature? So that literature, that edifice, isn't just text, it's numbers, it's data, but it's also concepts embedded in that text. So how do we make that text discoverable? We embed things in that text that search engines like Google can therefore find, and that the search engines that publishers try to deploy can find, and the funny little widgets that every little researcher, when he has spare time or she has spare time, puts together to make this literature more usable for them. So there's this sort of bubbling little community out there that I'm aware of, which consists of academics, that consists of publishers, it consists of the search engine technologists, and it consists also of the governments and the funders and the companies who need to engage with this literature and indeed to support it, to make this literature come alive. So it needs that little change of mindset on the part of those people who pay for the literature, that literature needs to be paid for in different ways. That literature that I'm talking about is the outcome of any research project being captured for posterity and for reinterpretation by others. To produce that literature in the form it needs to be, governments need to see it as a natural endpoint of a research project. And therefore, in order for that to happen, we need to move away from a model where libraries have to pay subscriptions for it, for example, and where funders actually pay the researchers the money that will then pay for these papers, the primary research papers, to be made available. So that's a little plug for a certain movement, not only for open access to the literature by public, by companies, by people in other disciplines who otherwise are trammeled from getting to grips with it, but also for investing in the literature itself, in the infrastructure of that literature, so that it can become usable. That way you tear walls down that currently surround what I would call science's grand interpretation of the world. So now let's just meet, as it were, the 4 people you're going to hear from who are curious and are interpreting the world in their own ways. David Aushalom is breaking down the walls of traditional electronics. So there you will hear a grand vision of how using something that is almost impossible to understand, even the physicists themselves who work with quantum entities, quantum information, find it hard to even imagine exactly what's going on, and sometimes they just retreat and be pragmatic and just get on with it. But it is profoundly important as a way of understanding the world, but also of using information in ways that we haven't even begun to dream of. David Harrell is going to be breaking down the walls of complexity. That's something that's analogous to what I've been talking about, that you can produce a model of a whole animal that you can then explore as a model rather than having to explore the animal itself. Nicola Puna will give you a grand vision of material at the very smallest scales, understanding how nature itself and how we scientists can manipulate nature at that very small scale in order to produce materials that we haven't so far encountered. And then Hal Varian will talk about something that is also fascinating for people using the scientific literature, tracking who's doing what within the scientific literature, Who's actually really working on that area? What's becoming important? What's most respected? And observing that via people's behavior. And he, coming from the world of economics, will give you a fascinating vision of just how, by observing people's behavior, you can see important trends and shifts in what is going on. So I will stop there. You will now hear from the speakers. Over to David Avshalom's introduction up there. Thank you.